Well, thank you all for coming. It is lovely to see you here on this sunny afternoon. It is our distinct honor and pleasure to have Professor Stovall from University of Illinois, Chicago visiting with us today. This event is organized by the Critical Studies Working Group. We are a group of faculty and students who are working to understand the issues of systemic oppression and ways we can address those issues through our research, scholarship, teaching, outreach, and service. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to make a couple of quick announcements. So, first of all, if you want to hear about any other events that the Critical Studies Working Group is organizing, please make sure that you sign in. There is a sign-up sheet, and we'll include you in our mailing list. If you are a student and you are here for extra credit, make sure that you sign your name on the sign-up sheet so that we could contact your professor and let them know that you have come for this event. Auburn University Bookstore was very kind to work with us. They have some of Professor Stovall's books available for sale. So if you want to learn more and understand the things that Dr. Stovall will be talking about better, grab a book before you head out. And after Dr. Stovall gives his talk, we'll have time for question and answer. Stick around, there's some water, some cookies. Visit with us, say hi, ask any more questions that you might have for him or for anyone from the Critical Studies Working Group this year. One last thing, but most important thing, the Critical Studies Working Group would like to thank the Department of Educational Foundations, Leadership and Technology, the College of Education, and Cross-Cultural Center for Excellence for supporting Dr. Stovall's visit. So we are very grateful for their sponsorship. Now to the best part. I know you're not here to listen to me, but we are honored and delighted to have Dr. Stovall with us. He is a professor of African-American Studies as well as Criminology, Law, and Justice. Dr. Stovall studies the influence of race in urban education, community development, and housing. He is the author of Born Out of Struggle, Critical Race Theory, School Creation, and the Politics of Interruption. Co-author of 21st Century Jim Crow Schools, The Impact of Charters on Public Education, Crucial Moment in Alabama History as charter school conversations are erupting in our state. Teaching Toward Democracy, Educators as Agents of Change. He is a co-editor of Handbook of Social Justice and Education and From Education to Incarceration, Dismantling the School-to-Prison Pipeline. Dr. Stovall's work has been recognized with such awards as Scholar Activist Award from Critical Educators for Social Justice, Derek Bell Award from Critical Race Theory and Education Association, William Atkins Award from the Society of Professors of Education, and Distinguished Alumni Award from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, among many others. I'm really cutting the list short. What sets Dr. Stovall apart is his deep involvement in the struggles of underserved communities, as well as his passionate and relentless pursuit of justice. Today, Dr. Stovall will be giving a talk titled Justice and the Contradictions of Traditional Educational Research Towards a Critical Race Analysis of Place and School. And it's just a tremendous honor that Dr. Stovall is here with us. Please help me welcome him.
Well, peace and greetings, everybody. Hopefully this finds you all in good spirits. And first, let me thank Dr. Adarova for actually having me and keeping in contact with me over the last couple of months. Over the last little bit, I have become very used to being uninvited to places. So to have somebody be consistent and stay inviting me is always a good thing, right? The second thing that I want to do is start with a statement of recognition. I recognize that I am on the land of the Cherokee, Choctaw, and many other nations whose names we do not know and do not say that have allowed me to rest my feet in these spaces. I also want to give specific recognition to the kidnapped Africans whose blood enriches the soil of this place. My great-grandmother was the daughter of those kidnapped Africans who lived no less than 120 miles away from here in a town called Thomaston, Alabama. So in recognition of those First Nation souls and the souls of those kidnapped Africans, I say and present to you all a humble soul from Chicago who is still struggling. And with that, thank you all for making me feel hella popular. Like I usually had this, as an undergrad, I used to have this kind of 50-degree rule, right? If it was over 50 degrees, I was just not coming to class in the spring, right? And that's how I almost did not make it out of undergrad, but that's another story. The other part that I actually want to talk about a little bit today is some things that we often get twisted, but we very rarely recognize the history upon which it originates. So when we talk about justice and actually dismantling particular historical relationships, we have to be clear around how we say those things. So when I told my mom I was coming to Auburn, first thing came out of my mouth was, "Ooh, child." She said, "How long you staying?" She was like, "Man, get home quick." And I said, and then this is from an Alabama. I said, "Huh?" She said, "Look, I know that as much things change, the more they don't." And I think it's important to say those particular things in this particular moment because there's this current political moment that I think we get distracted by. And the current political moment is one that gets folks fearful of the up and coming, whatever it is to be fearful for, whether it be immigrants, whether it be black folks, whether it be Latinx folks who are here, who have been here long term. And let's really talk about that in a succinct way, because anytime that we're talking about borders, we cannot have a conversation around borders without an explicit understanding of the Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo. And every time I had that conversation, everybody looks at me and goes, "What? Who? Guadalupe what?" Yeah, 1848. It actually has a particular provision in it. Remember, Mexico used to go how far? State of Oregon. Right? And the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo shifted the relationship. So now, remember, the state of Texas is actually the Mexican state of what? Tejas. We often forget that. And there's a reason why that's excluded from our history classes. And I have to say this in particular, and again, Elena, good looking out for inviting me because this might be the last time that I step foot in these two particular places, right? Because we also have to be clear about what it is that we're in. But in order to recognize what we're in, we have to be clear around history and what the vestiges of history are, right? And one of those vestiges of history is in the United States. White supremacy is a foundational principle to the founding of this place. It's not just the state of Alabama. It is a foundational organizing principle, just like capitalism is in the United States. And when we miss that point, everything else becomes victimized by our paranoia. So now, when we think about this in real time, now, when I say white supremacy, I want to be clear. I am not talking about white racial terror. Those are two different things. Now, white racial terror is part of white supremacy. But when I specifically say white supremacy, I am talking about the perceived views and values of white, Western European descended, Christian, able-bodied, cisgendered, heterosexual males as normal, right, and good. And everything else is othered. And what we have to come to grips with is when those things are othered, what do schools look like? What does housing look like? What does healthcare look like? What does employment look like? So now we're asking a different set of questions. And these questions are predicated upon a particular relationship. And it's not about anybody formally owning slaves, because that's always a piece. Stovall, I never owned slaves. That's never the question. Issue and concern is, do we live in a society that once had people devalued as less than human? And are we still revisiting moments where people continue to be devalued as less than human? Now, as university faculty, you really want to get in trouble? Start to talk about the relationship of universities to communities. Right? Now, I'm at the University of Illinois at Chicago. If any graduate student has had a problem with the IRB or the Institutional Review Board, look no further than the University of Illinois at Chicago. In 1995, the medical school was doing medical experiments on Puerto Rican women without consent forms. They were literally studying kidney disease in Puerto Rican women. They just got hit again for psychological experiments that they already were warned about and still committed to do. Right? Again, with the population of students of color. Now, this isn't 1863. This is 2019. So when we start to look at these particular relationships, and people often say, well, Stovall, can't we get past race? My response is, we've never gotten to race. And because we've never gotten to race, things look a certain way. Things operate a certain way. And it's argued as normal for them to function in a particular way. So one of the things that I'm always asking myself is, how am I intentional about interrupting the historical relationship that universities have had to communities of color that have been rooted in exploitation and marginalization, i.e. white supremacy? And given those particular relationships, what are we willing to do to rectify, redress, and recreate a different set of relationships? Can you actually do it? But what also it requires is for us to reframe the argument. So I look at a guy named Kevin Kumashiro, and Kevin Kumashiro always says, we often think about reframing in a different way. And he looks at the work of Lonnie Guinier. And Lonnie Guinier is a legal scholar who was actually considered for the Supreme Court under the Clinton administration. Lonnie Guinier wrote a book called The Miner's Canary. And in The Miner's Canary, she says this thing, and it was off the observation of her nieces and nephews. Her nieces they created a game. Then they had a couple other cousins come and they start playing a game. The cousins start winning over the nieces. And what did the nieces do? They changed the rules, right? So Lonnie is looking at this and she's saying, She said, this is a metaphor for life in the United States. She says, what are the rules of the game? Why are the rules perpetually shifting? And more importantly, what do we do to get people to keep playing? And herein lies the question. What do we get people to do to continue playing? And we've never asked, and Kevin's point is, we've never asked questions of the game. We've never asked questions of society. We don't talk about race in K-12 public schools because we fear the result. And young folks are thirsty for it, but because we only talk about race during the panic moment. We only talk about race when somebody has called somebody out of their name, when there's been a fight. We never go into the point around saying, well, what does it mean to start with race? What does it mean to engage in history that actually looks at, historical documents? What does it mean to actually start to engage from a perspective that not makes certain people uncomfortable, but is rooted in discomfort? right? And this is always the thing. And in education, I was talking to a group of folks earlier today, in education, we're always worried about making stuff nice, right? We always want it to be nice, right? And history just is not nice. And young people start to reject you telling the nice lie after a while, right? When we start to think about social studies, it's an important thing. As a social studies teacher, this is what I know. I know that social studies is intended to bore you. Right? That is its purpose, right? Because I'm going to give you these random facts, and I'm hoping that you're going to disconnect from them. And if you disconnect from them, you will never ask questions of them. And if I can get you to never ask questions of them, when something happens, you're not mad because you have no historical reference. Right? That's the purpose of social studies. So now, if I know that to be the purpose, what is the interruption? How do we begin to now start to think about our work from a lens of racial justice? So who has been wronged, right? And who determines the justice condition? It's very different when we talk about, because we don't have a criminal justice system in the United States. We have a criminal legal system. Two very different things. Very few people see justice in criminal legal systems, because they're intended to preserve and maintain power. The power along the lines of race, class, gender, age, ability, or what have you. So now when we ask these particular questions in a particular way, now, why is there so much chaos? And people say, well, Stovall, you're interrupting the way things used to be. And I'm always saying, we got to ask a real question. Because if we're actually going on the halcyon days of the way things used to be, then folks are going to have real problems. And folks are going to have real problems because we continue to refuse that which has victimized folks. That which has put folks in particular conditions that now are very hard to overcome. And we often distort this, right? You know, we're not too far away from Selma, right? We very rarely talk about the real story of Bloody Sunday, because we very rarely talk about who was in the front of the march. It was a group of fourth graders. And the question becomes, why are those fourth graders removed from history? Why is there no discussion of them? Now, people have theorized about this, because if fourth graders understand that other fourth graders demanded freedom, what will they do in a schoolhouse? Demand freedom, right? And think about it. If you're a kindergarten teacher, what are you going to do when all 35 of those young bloods collectively tell you no? It's 1 on 30. What you gonna do? Right? They all line up at the door like, nope. Bathroom break is right now. We taking it. And you like, oh. Right? And they 30 deep, all against the wall, like, nah, this is the demand for justice. Bathroom break. No more dry cookies. Right? What you gonna do? Right? The fear is, if young people understand what justice is, they will connect to it and demand it. So the way that you secure that young people do not demand justice is you erase their history. So now when we start to think about this in particular ways, how does this work? So now, where I'm from in Chicago, we think about the experimentation that's been done on communities of color. Right? Everything from pharmaceuticals to psychotropic drugs that actually used to be given to folks in prisons, and the effects were studied. Right? Now, currently, Tom Dart is the sheriff of Cook County. He says something, and I think we often miss the point from his quote. Tom Dart says he runs the largest mental health facility in the world, and is the Cook County Jail. And he says we have to ask a structural question: why a jail is the largest mental health facility in the world. Not the country, the world. He says that any given day, 80 to 85% of all people incarcerated in Cook County Jail has been diagnosed with some form of mental health distress. 80 to 85% of those folks have no treatment. 100% of those folks are awaiting trial. They haven't been incarcerated yet. They're in jail. They supposedly have a mechanism to bail them out. But bailing people out, in many cases, is financially impossible. You are also in an institution that charges you $13 an hour for a phone call. So now, once you actually are returned home, you have incurred more debt that you might have to pay if you're sentenced. So a good friend of mine says we need to recognize how the setup works. And now, when we talk about cycles of incarceration or a carceral state, then we got to ask a different question. And I want to actually complicate this a little more. And again, this is my attempt to reframe things. Last year, myself and an author that you all may know pretty well by the name of Eve Ewing used to teach in a prison. We taught in a place called Statesville. When you walk into Statesville, there is a series of yellow lines. And when you look up, there's a sign that says, please step to the right. Right? And how that operates is, and they call it a passing lane. So when you step to the right, anybody who's passing you is also stepping to the right. So if there's any infraction, the correctional officers can actually move on the space and what they call secure the perimeter. Now, these are grown men, right? And Statesville is what's referred to as a long-term prison, right? So the folks in Statesville, because Illinois no longer has the death penalty. So Statesville houses folks who have long-term sentences. So when I'm thinking about this and I'm walking in, the first thing I thought about was not being in prison. The first thing I thought about was a school. Because in schools are the same signage. Please step to the right. Yellow lines. Young people having to walk with their hands behind their back. Classes not starting with people unless they're in the frisk position. So now, we're no longer talking about a school to prison pipeline. We're talking about a school and prison nexus. In some instances, they are the same thing. You wind it down. You wear a uniform. You got an observation deck. And the question becomes, who are in those schools? And are they there by way of choice? Or are they there by way of condition and containment? I want to tell you all a story. I've been doing some work around looking at school closings, the destruction of public housing, and law enforcement. And a good friend of mine that I played high school basketball with used to be on a gang tactical unit of the Chicago Police Department. I told him about my work, and he's actually getting his PhD in sociology. So I told him about my work, and he said, man, I want you to talk to one of my old commanding officers who used to be on a gang tactical unit. And first thing he said, it's like, damn, I'm already on enough list. Okay, here I'm going to put myself on another one, right? So I go talk to his commanding officer. We're on the phone. He said, Stovall, I heard about your work. He said, man, you are exactly right. He said, but I want to tell you something. He said, I want to put this in context. He said, I want to tell you how to make a killer. What? He said, yeah, I want to tell you how to make a killer. I said, what are you talking about? He said, look, this is what you do. You do not have a viable place for folks to live. You make them housing insecure. You do not have a viable place for them to eat. You put them in a food desert. You do not have a viable place for them to work. You have created the neoliberal state and made service sector employment unlivable. Then he said, you hire me to contain them. It's like, damn it, this is a cop. I've never heard a cop offer spatial analysis and the spatial analysis of containment and how it operates. He said, look, man, this is what we know. We know that no young person born on the planet has a natural propensity to crime. He said, we know this. He said, we know this as police departments. He said, what we fail to recognize is that the conditions can create situations where crime may occur. The question that we need to ask is, are those conditions engineered? And if those conditions are engineered, who are they engineered by? And for what purpose? City of Chicago had over 700 homicides in 2016, over 500 in 2017, 2018 also under 500. We do not have the count for 2019. In 1977, the city of Chicago almost had 1,000 homicides. So the rhetoric that you all get about Chicago, oh my God, you're from Chicago, did you get shot? Were people shooting at you when you were entering the airplane? Right? This thing, that's always, as soon as I tell somebody I'm from Chicago, oh my God, violence. So I was like I almost see like people faint. Like, oh my God, Chicago. Right? So this thing becomes, how do we need to complicate the narrative? And the complication of the narrative says, we do not have a gang violence problem. We do not have a homicide problem. We have a displacement problem. We have a gentrification problem. We have a marginalization problem. We have a containment problem. Right? And there are certain populations that we have deemed to be disposable. And if you have deemed a population to be disposable, you will do certain things to them. You will make them move in particular ways. You will distress them to the point that they turn on each other. And you create containment zones for them to turn on each other in. Give an example. Let's say we were a school. You all are one school. You all are another school. I'm splitting you all right down the middle. I close you all and send everybody here. What happens on the first day? Thank you for, some people are afraid to say, fights! Hella fights! Like, has anybody ever been in a fight where you don't even know who you're fighting? Like that's just like, oh, that's that brawl. You was like, man, who is that? I don't even know. Look, just do some shit. Oh, you know, it's the chaos thing, and then it starts to roll, right? Now, in Chicago, we have closed 150 schools since 2004. We closed 50 of those schools in one summer, where the dynamic that I just described to you happened 50 times. So are we talking about youth with propensity to crime? Or we're talking about an instance where they've instantaneously been criminalized because they live under hyper-segregation and police containment? Again, I can engineer a condition. I can create a fight. Now the question is, how do we now start to look at these things, not as happenstance, but as structural events? So to interrupt the common narrative, we have to think about racism, white supremacy as structural, not located in these individualized acts of bigotry. It's not about somebody calling you out a name, right? That's a part of it. It's not about somebody burning a cross. That's part of it. The thing that we haven't paid attention to in the United States is, how do structures impact how we move and think of other people based on the bodies that they occupy? Right? And now, based on the bodies that they occupy, do we see a continuation of the organizing principles of life in the United States? Or what Saidiya Hartman refers to as the afterlife of slavery. So now, when we start to look at this in a different space, you got to ask a different set of questions. Because I was telling a group earlier today, in the state of Illinois, we spend $270,000 to keep a young person incarcerated for 365 days. All right, that's our annual cost per student to keep a young person incarcerated. The school district that spends the most spends $25,000 per student. All right, now that district is like, when you spend $25,000 per student, I mean, you damn near got walls made of gold in a school, right? So now, if I think about this, because a lot of times an economist try to argue me down and say, Stovall, if you put in 3 square meals a day, the costs are gonna be higher. Look, bro, here's how it is. Even if you house somebody, you're not gonna have 10 times the cost to educate them. I don't know what world that exists. You may have some higher expenditures, but it won't be 10 times as much. And because it's 10 times as much, I have to ask the question, when 90% of the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice is Black and Latinx, and the school district that I just told you about is almost 98% white, there's a structural issue there. And what we have to pay attention to is, how do structures pay attention to particular conditions that use themselves to maintain power? Because it is something critically important when we talk about structures. Structures are not created. Institutions are not created. Systems are not created to destroy themselves. They are created to maintain power. So when those institutions are created to maintain power, how does it manifest itself in a place like Chicago? The city of Chicago has lost 200,000 Black residents since 2000. That is almost 20% of the Black population in less than 25 years. Where have they gone? What have been the reasons for them leaving? What do the schools look like in terms of their exit? And now when we begin to ask these questions, now our movement, our strategies are different. So now, what does it mean to engage our work from a justice-centered perspective? And here's what I mean by this. We are very clear about the injustices that have happened to people. What we are unclear about is who determines the justice condition. So now, when we talk about, because like a lot of times I worry about this, because everybody talks about social justice. We're centered in social justice. And then when you ask a person what social justice is, then they go, justice. Right? It's almost like being in college of education when you ask people about pedagogy, and nobody wants to answer it. Like, so what is this thing, pedagogy? Oh, well, pedagogically speaking. I was like, come on, man. What are we doing? Right? But because it's always, and that's an obvious say. So for the undergrads in the room, when a professor gives you this $16 million word, they got some 18,000 syllables in it, and then you look at him or her hella crazy because you're like, what the hell did they just say? They don't know half the time either. Right? Let's just keep it 100% true. Right? So this thing around now, if we're going to talk about social justice, if we're going to talk about a justice condition, we have to determine what it is. But here's the caveat. I will argue that the worst people to determine a justice condition are folks at the university, because of its particular history. Now, the people who best can determine the justice condition are the people who have experienced the injustice. So now the question is, what is the work that we're doing with people who have experienced the injustice? And what is redress according to them, not us? Right? Because we get white capish real quick in academia. Right? I have this new theoretical paradigm and I'm just here to save you, black and brown, baby. Right? And I always like when people come with that, because kindergartners have no bullshit meter, and they just look at you like, please. Take your ass someplace else. Right? And I love how kindergartners do it, because kindergartners don't even engage you in conversation. They just walk away. Right? You know, little ones, they just look at you, they just like. Right? That's why I love little ones. Like the babies, it's no meter, right? They're just like, we're not doing that. Right? And actually, the babies, they actually feel you, right? So they don't even have to have a lot of exchange. It's like, and I always would ask, like, man, why don't y'all walk away from such and such? And the way they answer, they always go, it just didn't feel right. It wasn't right. It's not right. No. So that thing, I trust more than a theoretical paradigm that's saying, here's what's happening to you and here's what we should be doing. So now if we think about what does it mean to invert that relationship? So now you're approaching communities and saying, given the history of the university and community spaces, there is no good reason for you to trust me. In fact, you shouldn't. And I need you to hold me accountable. And in holding me accountable, now what will we do? What does that look like? Right? And I found that out in trying to build a school. Right? Folks went on a 19-day hunger strike. And they said, look, Stovall, you talking one of my homies who was one of the hunger strikers. She just kept it to me 100% clear. She's like, Stovall, you talk a lot of shit, but you talk shit in a good way. Come on, we're trying to build this school. I was like, oh, okay, damn. Right? So my first meeting was not in a university classroom, but it was at her kitchen table. Right? And the first thing she said was, we got a school, and we all felt like third graders sitting around a table because everybody was like, damn. And we all looked at each other like, what are we going to do? And then we started having these wild visions, right? So our first vision of Social Justice High School was, it was going to be called the Che Lumumba Institute of Revolutionary Practice in Education. Right? That was the first name. We was like, look, and you know how third graders sit in lunch? So we were sitting around the table, we was like, oh, it's going to be the coldest, what? Right? And it was like, look, and then, you know, third graders get super hyped when they talk like, look. Hold on. Wait. Okay. Here's what's gonna happen. All right, look. It's gonna be blood. It's gonna be a red like snake trail down the hallway, right? And then we're gonna have it be called like the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And then at the back end, it's gonna have a trail of tears on it. And then it's gonna go all the way to the basketball court. And then the blood is gonna go into like two hands crossed up like this, and then in the hands it's gonna have two machetes, right? And then the blood is gonna be blood, and it's gonna be paint is gonna look like blood, and the blood is gonna say justice. And he was like, oh, it's not coldest. I was like, this is gonna be the coldest. Like people gonna come from all over the world to look at this, bro. What? Like, and then we slapping five. We like, dude, this the code. We gonna do that shit. I got a homie who can paint. We can do this, right? We like, yes, homie, it's gonna happen. Like, you know, it's like third grade. It's like, when it's gonna happen? Tomorrow. Like, hey, I got paint. I'm gonna go to the store right now, buy some paint. It's gonna happen tomorrow, right? School wasn't even built. Right? It was like, look, we gonna stand on the ground where the school is built with the paint. Right? Let's let construction build around us, right? And then one of my homies walked in the room and she said, have you forgotten that this is Chicago public schools? And we was just like, ugh. Right? But we still got the fist. But, you know, we didn't get the rest of our stuff. But the thing was, we can't be imposing a vision, but that wasn't asked of us. We have to listen first to what people want. Right? And the first thing that they said was, we want a curriculum that does not tell our story in a way that continues to dehumanize us. We want a curriculum that humanizes our struggle. We want a curriculum that is rooted in the principles of the hunger strike to create this place. Now you have different work to do. So now it's thinking about our work from this perspective of how are we responsive first to community needs, right? Because we often talk about culturally responsive curriculum, right? But we very rarely go into what is the responsiveness that we will actually engage. How do we actually do that? Is there somebody already in the building who's doing it that we're forgetting about? Because good teaching always happens, in many cases, in isolation. Right? So now, how do we actually start to pull from those teachers who know what they're doing, and instead of going to the district for some terrible professional development that you will forget in 10 minutes, what does it mean to have somebody in your building leading the professional development? Was what we actually did. We had a principal who would come in faculty meetings and say, my job as principal is to keep central office off your back so you can do what you need to do. It was like, dang. Right? He also had a philosophy. He said, the first answer that you should always give to central office is no. I was like, damn. He said, yeah. But he said, but no is a contingent answer. Once you say no, you have to be willing to do something. So you're not saying no just to refute it. You're saying no because you're doing something else. Now, what are you doing? Right? So now we rethink this particular paradigm and we talk about justice. Now we have to rethink that justice is not just this antecedent to history. Justice is the history. Because no one has taken these conditions lying down. We have refuted and refused to see them. So now what does justice look like? What does it mean? Because people have been fighting for it in time immemorial. How do you now begin to excavate that and use it for your work? Right? In that type of work, you can't be fearful about saying things like white supremacy and explaining it. You must explain what the justice condition is. The rule is there can be no empty rhetoric. Right? Because that's another thing that we can get in justice work, right? Everybody talks about, right, it's hella flowery, and then when you get in front of some young folks and they're just looking at you like, no, that is not working. Right? What are you going to do? Right? Are you going to accuse them and chide them because they're being disrespectful? Or is that a point for you to reflect on your own pedagogy? How you do what you do. Right? So now it changes up how you evaluate yourself. Right? What would it mean if teachers were evaluated on creating joy? What if students ran 80% of the evaluations? Right? It's a whole different thing because people think about young folks hate order and structure. No, young folks hate people who don't know what they're doing. Right? Because if you know what you're doing, they are riding with you. And I always like to assess little ones around now. It's like, man, how do you know your teacher is good? And the first thing they always say is, they love us. I said, well, how does he or she show you all love? It's like, look, they ask us questions. They find answers if they don't know them. They talk to our families like people and not things. Right? These things that we think to be basic. But in many of our worlds, becomes an anomaly. So now, if we're thinking about interrupting that common paradigm, how do we start to bring that back? Or to bring it to the space where it may not have existed? Because my concern is when we start statements with back in my day, those days may not have been good for folks like myself. And I got to be real clear about that in a state like Alabama. Right? I can't be fearful of that. I got to be real about that in where I'm from in Chicago. Because we experienced a type of segregation that we still don't talk about. And it was written into law. Right? And a new way to teach Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry is to go back and talk about the case that her father waged against the city of Chicago that went all the way to the Supreme Court, that ended restrictive covenants in Chicago. Lorraine Hansberry was writing about her family. And there's a reason why we never talk about it. Because our stories become discounted. They are devalued. So now, how do you bring them back? What is the process that you use to bring them back? And again, how do we do this work with others? Because in academia, one of the things that they tell you, and this is for the grad students, we train you up around being in these solitary conditions, right? That you just in the stacks with a candle, dying at midnight, looking at each other, and then y'all walk out, and the sun is halfway coming up, and then you say, "Did that just happen?" And then you just like, "Just get through it, just get through it," right? And we just tell y'all to suffer that, right? And then when y'all don't do it, we say y'all weak. Right? What's wrong with y'all? Y'all need to get a little. Back in my day, I had one shoe in the stacks, and there wasn't even no air conditioning. Whatever. Right? Because I've had that experience, right? It's like, what's wrong with y'all? Do y'all know I used to sleep on a stone bed? Shut up. Right? But this thing around how we think about those things. But now when we talk about a justice condition, the thing that we're talking about is how we keep each other alive. The other part of the justice condition is, how do we remain overcommitted to the spaces that bring us joy over the spaces that bring us pain and marginalization? As the baseline, right? What does it mean to work by a rule? If I cannot explain this to my grandmother or someone I love, I do not know what it means. So the next time you say the word neoliberalism, I want you to think about your grandmother and a third grader. If you cannot explain them to either, you don't need to have that word coming out of your mouth. Right? Now, what does it also mean to think about whatever it is that you do and its application with the people that you say you care about? Right? So no more theory for the sake of theory. No more learning. I just want to learn for the sake of learning. No, you don't. There's shit happening. And if you don't address those things that are happening, you will become victimized by them. So if you want to upset the setup, you got to be intentional about what the setup is. You got to be intentional about how it works, and you got to be intentional about how you approve it or dismantle it. And that is work that you will not do by yourself. Right? In fact, I'm here to tell you that it will kill you before you try to do it by yourself. Right? So this thing around what we're talking about is not just a rethinking, but it's also a revisiting. It's revisiting what people have determined to be the justice condition. When those fourth graders decided to march on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, when they wrote the SCLC about what that struggle was and how they understood it and how they would be there, regardless of who said they could not come. Right? Those are the things that we need to revisit. We cannot run from them. And we continue to run from them. And all the things that we're seeing in schools is just reflective of us running from them. Right? I take an approach that Bill Ayers often talks to, is about diving into the wreckage. When you dive into the wreckage, the first person you're going to see is yourself. What are you going to say to yourself about what it is that you're doing? Right? In real time, not as something theoric, right? Because I don't come at you all as quote unquote expert. I come at you all as someone who is also struggling with this. I'm coming at you all as someone who fails miserably, often in my classroom. Right? I had a lesson 2 weeks ago, awful, just damn terrible. Right? I had to sit in the corner and be like, damn, I have got to do better. Right? And then I told my undergrads that, and they were just like, what? So what's wrong with you, man? You too reflective. You doing too much. And I was like, look, if I don't do that, this just becomes worse for y'all. Right? So this thing around how are we intentional about that? Right? Not as something far away, but something that is close. Right? It is with us. And when we do it, we always got to ask why and for what. Right, so I'm really thinking about y'all grad students, right? So you that first semester of grad school, you're like, man, I'm about to choke somebody. Somebody about to get it. Right? I'm about to catch a case. right? You got to be clear about why and for what, right? Because it can't just be the funky letters, right? I know a bunch of people with PhDs who know very little about everything. I know a bunch of people with PhDs who have trouble ordering pizzas, right? That have y'all in class and you saying, is this really happening to me right now? Right? And I'm saying structurally, there's an issue with that. Right? So now if we're going to interrupt that, what does the interruption look like? A lot of times in grad school, you learn more of what not to do than what to do. Right? You see them terrible job talks, you're like, did that just happen? Right? You see somebody talk some random theory that they never applied to, and then they just wrote this chapter that's just 30 pages of nothingness. Right? And then somebody says, well, this is one of the premier texts around such and such. It's shitty. Right? And this thing around being able to say that, because that's the always thing they try to punk you, right? You know, the academic boogeyman is coming for you. They ain't coming. Do what you do. Find the folks who support the work that you do. Build with them. Right? With that work, you will influence the enemy. You gotta trust it. But you have to find those folks. And I think this becomes important because a lot of times we give you all the bogus Hollywood movie about somebody coming in and, hey, little black brown babies, all you need to do is write. Here's your composition book. And then everybody walks away in the sunset. Come on, man. That's not it, right? Good friend of mine, Patrick Kamayan, says, we need to understand how alienation works. And when we understand how young people have been alienated, we must first start with their alienation. They have to see how they have been alienated. And when they see how they have been alienated, now what is redress? What does it mean to repossess what you have been dispossessed of? Something has been taken from you. What are you willing to do to get it back? What are the processes that you will use? Who are the practices? What are the practices that you will use? Who are you willing to work with? And how are you able to understand your shortcomings? Right? Because a couple of my students checked me around. It's like, Stovall, you come in with this hella dude. That's how they said it. Like, you come in hella dude. Right? And that can be ways that are interpreted as toxic. I was like, oh, I got to take that, right? I got to understand that because it is not an attack on the folks that I care about. And I have to be clear that it's not an attack. But at the same time, I must also be clear about those who I work in solidarity with, how they have been attacked in ways that I have never seen as a male identified person. I got to be clear about that. And if I am not clear about that, I will subject folks to the same thing. Right? So when we're able to talk about this in real time, this isn't something far away, right here. And interrupting that means we have to start here. It is nothing far away. What are we trying to do? Who are we trying to do it with? Where are we running to? Right? So when people talk about fugitivity, because a lot of times people, like in academia, people go super hard on theoretical constructs, and sometimes people miss the point. Right? So when people talk about a fugitive space or building a fugitive space, fugitivity first is a decision that says something is not right. And then we will either use rules to shift, or we will break those things that have dispossessed us. We have made a collective decision to run. But we got to figure out where we're running to, who we're running with, and more importantly, why are we running? All right? And be intentional about that. Right? All the mistakes involved, right? Because this isn't a pretty picture, right? It's jumbled, right? We always tell you all, qualitative research is messy. right? Until you do it and they say, well, that's too messy. Right? But this thing around, no, really understanding the messiness, right? What's in the roughage? How do we start to grapple with that? Right? And now if we think about it in that way, we can do more, right? So I don't want folks to leave today depressed as shit, right? Oh, damn, Stovall said we all gonna die. It's terrible in the world, right? I want us to understand that there has been a decision that people have made to change their condition. And it's just like Frantz Fanon says. He says, young people will fulfill their destiny or betray it. And I hope we do not betray it. And in that fulfillment, I know that I have to be doing that work in community with people, not separate from them. And that's not as popular, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I am much more concerned with the work moving forward and how we will do it. Right? Let me check in with y'all. This is making sense. All right. Well, let me stop there. Thank y'all. Hopefully this is, not a session where we'll bomb out. Right? But thank y'all again. Yep. So we set it up. I don't want to be respective of the beautiful day, but we also set it up so that if we have their questions that folks want to ask or what have you, this is a good time to have a conversation. And no question is a bad one because we all are struggling with this, right? Just trying to figure it out. All right. So any questions that folks may have, I'm perfectly fine with, or we can engage in longer staring contests. Yes, sir.
To start things, I have a daughter who's teaching science in Brooklyn at an all-girls startup charter school, and all girls of color, where she is. And the question is, do those things make sense? Does it make sense to have separate schools for just girls? I know you've written about charter schools. I'm very ambivalent about charter schools because I love public education. In New York City, this is Brooklyn.
Hey.
They seem to be maybe using them more intelligently than other places.
Yeah. Because I think there's about 3 layers there. But I think one of the things that's really important, all of these things are site-specific. Right now, the early data that we have on gender-specific schools is that they can be useful in some instances, right? And a lot of times, that, especially more so for girls than for boys, right? And that's a larger question around patriarchy, right? How schools are actually situated in this kind of patriarchal sense, right? So if young girls are able to see themselves in different spaces, then there's the potential to actually address some of those issues and concerns. So, or it could be something else, right? You could have, and I've seen this, right? You've got all girls schools, dual principal, hella dual teachers, right? It's kind of defeating the purpose, right? Because the idea of having those spaces are for those girls and young women to be able to see themselves without being encroached upon in ways that we've normalized in terms of patriarchy and sexism, right? So if a school is intentional around addressing that, you can have some strong results. Now, for me, with charters, the main thing I always think about is variance. You all in Alabama are about to engage this. Charters have a very unique history. Your first charters were actually set up for teachers to study their own practice. Those charters never came to fruition, right? So that first generation of charters, we never saw happen, right? There were a couple of iterations of them in the mid-90s, but by and large, all of those charters have since closed, right? There might be less than 10 that are still around. Charters, and the biggest problem, charters have been monetized. This is the issue and concern. So the state of Alabama isn't talking about engaging a space where teachers can study their practice or that young folks can see themselves reflected in classrooms. the state of Alabama has determined that charters make their overall expenditures cheaper, right? So now what they do, they contract with an educational management organization. That educational management organization runs a particular set of schools, and they run these schools in ways that are antithetical to everything we know about learning, right? Because what charters actually work on and I should say corporate charters. Corporate charters work on a process of extraction. And this is what I mean by that. So say some of you all are parents and you go to the charter open house, right? They got all the lights, they giving away iPads, all this fancy slick shit, right? Then they do something. They have you sign a contract. And the contract says that if your son or daughter gets 2 consecutive Fs in a semester, then they kick them out. Here's the real kicker, right? They know that that's just a way for them to keep the contract that they made with the state in play, right? So they tell the state that if you contract with us as an educational management organization, we will keep academic performance on state standardized tests at X level. All they're doing after that is protecting that, right? So it has nothing to do with learning. It's about protecting the contract, right? And then so now if you harm their capacity to fulfill the contract, then you get removed, right? Now, I talk about school and prison nexus. The same thing happened with the Correction Corporation of America in the state of Texas. 3 years ago, CCA sued the state of Texas because it contracted with the state that they would keep an 89.9% occupancy rate. Now, think about this. This is a contract. This is a contract where a private prison is saying, if you contract with us, we have to have almost 90% of our buildings filled. The state of Texas, I think, went to like 88.3 something. It was some very minuscule difference, right? CCA sued Texas and won off a breach of contract. Right? So when we think about these particular relationships, I don't see those relationships as disparate, right? I see those as the same set of relationships, right? It's the contractual relationship on the bodies of people, right? It's not about, just like prison is not about rehabilitation, those particular schools are not about learning, right? If you get, and they do other slick things, right? So we got a school in Chicago that says 100% of our students get accepted to college. I can finesse that in a number of different ways, right? All I have to do is from your freshman year, have you apply to anywhere from 10 to 30 schools every year. The numbers game says you're going to get into one. Right? Now, does that mean anything about the learning of those young folks in that space? Absolutely not. Right? It's a ruse, right? Because the sell that they give to parents, they say, look, you've had 30 years of shit. Here's this new thing. We don't know what it is either, but at least it's new. Right? And they do this. Like there's a school called Acero Soccer Academy. You can look it up. It used to be called Uno Soccer Academy in Chicago. It looks like a giant eagle, right? So it has all these, it's building that, let's say, it actually functions like a bird, and it's supposed to be modeled after soccer academies in Western Europe, right? So like Real Madrid, Atletico, they have soccer academies for little ones. So they set it up like this. You go into the school, open house, they got mariachi bands playing, they got, the young folks wearing uniforms like they wear in Ciudad, Mexico City. They got all the little joints and all the, everybody's looking at the parents and like, oh shit, this is great, right? The first day you walk in that school, you can no longer speak Spanish. Right? These are all Latinx students. From the first day, you are disallowed to speak Spanish. Now, people say, well, this is a tough love bilingual education. There's nothing bilingual about it. In fact, a good friend of mine observed it. He said, Stovall, if that's what's happening, he said, I see it in an entirely different way. He says, you have a school that has committed itself to teaching young people how to hate their mamas. Right?
Like the Indian schools.
Exactly like the Indian schools. Right? So if we think about Carlisle, the exact same premise. And that's that thing about revisiting this, right? When we revisit this, we see these particular relationships show up again, right? And there's no discussion of race. There's no discussion of class. There's no discussion of community context. And for me, what's the expectation in a place like that, right? I can become an autotonic follower of rules. That doesn't mean I'm learning anything, right? And that's my concern with charters that operate from that corporate model. And I think this is what the state of Alabama has to contend with. Because the people that are trying to negotiate with the state of Alabama are not individual community-based charters, right? Those do not exist. These are educational management organizations that are backed by multinational banks that are actually trying to secure these contracts. I think it's critically important to recognize that difference. Apologies for the elongated answer.
Professor Stovall, thank you so much. That's all. Thank Dr. Stovall for again, stay for a conversation. We have some water, we have some cookies, we have some books for you to look at. If you have more questions that you want to ask, please ask Dr. Stovall. Thank you all.